Hi, everybody. It's July 31st, 2025, and this is the Backdrop Weekly Dev Meeting. We get together every week to talk about development priorities for Backdrop CMS, usually focused around Backdrop Core. My name is Nate Lampton. I'm the technical lead of the Backdrop project, and I'm joined here today by a half dozen folks. We'll go around the room and do some quick introductions. We'll start with Tim, and then we'll go to Justin.
Hi, I'm Tim Erickson. I'm St. Paul Tim on the internet in Deerwood, Minnesota. And that's it, Justin.
Hello, I'm Justin Kaiser. I am Kaiser CD on the internet. I'm here checking in on Backdrop because I've been out of the loop for a few weeks after a week in Denver at Drupal Camp and Laracon. So interested to see what's going on.
Thanks, Justin. We'll go to Luke and then Martin.
Help unmute myself. Hi, I'm Luke McCormick, Sell ear on various things. One of the organizers of Bad Camp these days, and I haven't been around for a bit, so popping back in.
Thanks, Luke. Martin and then Jen.
Hey, I'm Martin Price, Yorkshire Pudding around Backdrop, and I'm a Backdrop developer in Northeast England.
Thanks, Martin. Jen? One second.
Sorry. Jen Lambton joining from Oakland, California.
Okay, great. Thank you. Luke, you just raised an important point. I think that Bad Camp planning is underway. I think this week, I think is the last week, maybe tomorrow even is the last day for session submissions. Is that right?
Technically yesterday, but if anybody has one and slide it in, we'll just look the other way.
And I do believe that we're planning some backdrop activities at Bad Camp. Jen or Luke, can you fill us in on what we're
Yeah,
expecting there?
there's a Backdrop Summit on the first day. It'll be pretty similar to last year. And just to announce, we are looking for sponsors for the summit. So if anyone knows anyone who wants to sponsor that, send them to me.
So the summit is a whole day?
Hmm.
Okay, so one whole day of backdrop activities, which usually looks like an introduction training sort of thing, right?
Yeah, last year what we did is we sort of took a poll of the audience in the morning and see what people wanted to know about, and then we broke into smaller groups in the afternoon so that everybody could talk about whatever most interested them, and we had a really good turnout, so that was really successful last year.
Yeah, great. That'll be in Oakland, California, which is great because that's kind of our headquarters. And uh, let's see, I don't know the exact dates. Sorry. It's late
I
September.
I theoretically should, since I'm in charge of making the world understand that, but it's September 25th and 26th.
Thank you.
Probably worth pointing out to the wider world that BAD is an acronym for Bay Area Drupal, and it's not a corrective camp for naughty people.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. All right, great. Well, let's get into general discussion. We have a number of things that we didn't quite get to last week, and so we'll kind of pick up there. Um, we'll start off with issue 6939, and I will share my screen. Second. Here we go. So this one is a relatively new issue opened by Benny Bob W. And it's just about like the order of items changing inside of our config files. Um, and yeah, not exactly sure how to reproduce. It does happen though, because um, the way the JSON files are saved right now in config is entirely dependent upon the array order. And so arrays in PHP, the keys can have an order. And so if something's, if you add something to an array, it tends to get added to the end. But if you update something that is already there, it gets replaced in place of where the current key was previously. Um, and there's no strong ordering in our config files at all. It's really just whatever order the array keys are in, then it's going to maintain that order. So the order consistency right now is only loosely enforced. That I mean, it's not enforced at all actually, but it's loosely maintained because typically when we load stuff out, the order isn't changed, and then when it gets saved back in, the array is still in the same order as it was when it was loaded back out. And so, but it does happen that the keys can get rearranged like this. Now, some modules, especially if you're doing like a settings form or something like that, the order will like it can be enforced, I guess, by the function that saves the config, but I don't think most modules really prioritize the order there either. Jen, you said that you posted a comment here saying that we might have an old issue about it.
Yeah, so this started bothering me like almost immediately after we put in configuration, and I remember complaining about it for a couple of months, and I thought for sure that there was an issue that I was working on with Klonos about um, whether this was important or not because it was bothering me as a developer, but like, is it going to bother an end user sort of thing? But I cannot for the life of me find that issue, so I'm still looking. It could be that we had a discussion in the forum or something, and not in the issue queue. But I definitely also, this bothers me. I would love it if we could have these consistent. I think Drupal introduced something to fix this. They also had the problem in early Drupal 8, and I don't think they have the problem anymore. So it might be worth looking into what they're doing currently. But yeah, I think
Yeah,
it would be great.
it
We could
might
do.
also be there's a lot of overlap with typecasting, like whether or not an integer is saved or a Boolean, like true false, right? Like that also sometimes swaps between, like sometimes it saves 0 and sometimes it saves the string 0 and sometimes it saves false.
Mhm.
Um, and especially between the string uh, representation and the integer representation, we tend to get a lot of flip-flopping between those two. Um, yeah, and I do remember that we had some issue about that. The suggestion that I had back then, if we can find that issue, is that we could potentially look at the default config file provided by a module and use that as the template for updates to the config file, like as it gets saved
That
moving
doesn't
forward.
really help though, because there are things like, I don't know, I would say most config files are probably like, oh, these are settings per node type. And so they're going to be adding in like new types. And then if you change your types, the types get reordered. And none of those are in the original file.
Hmm.
And so I think we need to have some sort of standard that doesn't depend on looking at a example version of the file that may be incomplete.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it wouldn't work in all scenarios for sure.
yeah.
Um, yeah, they get complicated. Other things like views and layout config files could be enforced relatively easily because there's the mechanisms for saving that configuration are it's really complex, and so we could have the opportunity of enforcing them. Um, just when the view or the layout is saved, it could be more strict about the config that actually gets saved in.
I would love it if we could have something universal though, so that we wouldn't have to have our own specific controls that don't fix like this field example.
Yeah, well, if we do look over it, the reason why I'm beating around it is because I don't like the Drupal solution where,
Oh,
yeah, because you need to also make a schema file in Drupal. So
oh,
you can't just like start using config. You also need to describe your config.
oh no,
And
no.
and that's
I don't like
it's
that either.
really it's difficult to create those schemas. Um, and
Yeah.
so
I
that's
was
that's
thinking like surely there's some simple thing you could just like alphabetize them or something like that. And then that way they're in the same order unless you add something and then it gets stuck in the middle. And it's fine if it gets stuck in the middle, but at least it'll just always be in the same, I don't know. It seems like Benny Bob W found a library in the next comment where they found or there's like standards. Um, so maybe let's just I'll read. I haven't looked at that yet, but I'll see if
hmm.
I can figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll need to take a look if that'll help or not. Well, yeah, we don't know. Like it is slightly bothersome. Um, and yeah, that would be great. I I don't know what happens. Maybe somebody else has this experience, but yeah, when you look at it through a diff, I think that it shows the diff like this. But
Mhm.
I think as far as the config sync interface is concerned, just moving the order is not important, I
Right,
believe. Does
right.
does
That's
that
why
match
this is
other
like
people's
a
experience?
developer problem and not a end user issue, is
Hmm.
because it was never an issue in the backdrop UI. But as a developer, if you're on the command line and you do a git diff to see what's changed in your config, it'll show a whole bunch of stuff that's changed that's not. So yeah, that's where it's like, is it a high priority? No. Would it be very nice to fix? Absolutely. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, if it's okay, I'll jump to the other issue that we have in here, which is config related. And this issue is about enabling modules, themes, and layouts via config sync. Um, and this issue is a little bit misleading in that layouts really doesn't need to be a part of this title because layout templates aren't managed the same way as themes and modules. That layout templates already are managed via config, because there's no database associated, there's no separate config associated with the layout template. It's just, is the layout template enabled or not, and it's saved as part of the layout uh, global settings for the layout module. So, but enabling modules and themes are quite a bit different. So, uh, yeah, Gregory opened this issue several years ago and suggested that we make a config file called system extensions.json that makes it so that when you run config sync, uh, it can turn on modules at the same time as the config, um, uh, as other config being imported. I really like this because right now, what happens when you try to import config, let's say you've turned on, uh, you know, two new modules, and those two modules also have two config files for their individual settings. When you run config sync, it posts a notice saying, hey, you got to turn on module X and you got to turn on module Y before you can run config sync because, well, it doesn't actually tell you you have to turn on those specific modules. It just says this config file and that config file, no module owns them. It doesn't actually tell you which module you need to turn on because it doesn't actually know. It just knows that no module has claimed uh, a config file. And the way it does that is that all config in Backdrop needs to be owned by a module that declares it via hook config info. And if no module has declared ownership over a config file when the config sync runs and it encounters a new config file that no module has claimed, it goes, I don't know what to do with those. And so it prevents the import from firing. And the reason it does that is that some config files, when they're imported, also require database changes. The most well-known example of this is that when you import a field config file, it needs to also create database tables for that config. And so that's why you can't import a config file unless a module has claimed ownership of it, because until that module is turned on, we don't know if there's associated database changes when a config file is imported. So you need to have its module enabled first, claim it, uh, and then and then it's allowed to be imported via config sync. So so anyway, the task of turning on and off modules um, would make it so it's not quite as simple as it sounds, because this means that modules need to be enabled first as a separate step before the rest of the config sync happens. So the modules would need to be turned on uh, first as part of config sync, and then they would be available to claim ownership over subsequent config files and allow the import to continue, or the config sync to continue. Greg opened this pull request up years ago, but just recently, yeah, he opened this, yeah, in 2021. But just recently, I pushed additional changes that make it so that it actually works now. There's a lot of feedback still that needs to be done here. The big question that I've got here is what should the config file look like? Looking like this comment summarizes the config file, but I can also just show you the full config file as it looks right now. So this is the structure of it. It makes system.extensions like Greg had originally suggested. And it has a list of modules and a list of themes. And the states in here are either true, false, or they're not here at all, like that. And so false means that the module is disabled, and removed entirely means that the module is uninstalled. Because unlike Drupal, we have the states of installed, installed and enabled is one state, disabled is another state, and then uninstalled is a third state. Drupal now only has installed and enabled, and disabled and uninstalled. Like it's either it's fully installed or it's fully not installed. So we have an additional state there. But what happens in here though, like changing these config file values, like this is actually in my active config directory. Greg at one point said he wanted to be able to like change this config file and have it act immediately, which is the way a lot of our other active config works. Like you can change the site title, for example, by updating the config in system core.json, and it has an effect immediately. He's like, I want to be able to change this value and have it just enable or disable the module by changing it. And no, that's not possible.
Sounds
Because
highly dangerous too.
yeah, because literally you would have to run the hook, modules enabled and hook modules disabled, hook module install, hook module uninstall, hook module enable, hook module disable. There's all of these hooks that happen when you turn on or off a module, which almost always include installing database tables or uninstalling, dropping database tables. And so all that this config file is doing is it's just providing the config system something to work from. And when a config sync occurs, then it does all of the, normal module enable, disable, and it updates the system table to reflect the current state of the modules. So modifying this config file doesn't have any immediate effect. If it's in active config, it needs to be imported through config sync for it to actually do anything. Yeah, so this pull request, let's see, who is it that posted? Thomas recently said that he was interested in testing this. I saw that he was in Zulip saying as much, that he was also interested in reviewing it, but I think that at this point only Martin's really taken a look at it. So yeah, I think this would be great to make it possible. Although it is, I need to also say that not everybody thinks it's great. There's 35 items in here. Doc Wilmot, Indigo Zella, and Jen, I know, Vladimir as well. Looks like there's some skepticism about the value here. But there's also people that are in favor of it. BW Panda had originally been here, Gregory, obviously, Laren, myself. So we're kind of a little bit split here as far as, how great a return on value this is. It is specifically, going to mostly be a developer-oriented feature, although could be useful for end users that are like moving between, maybe, the power user or a site builder that's made config changes in one environment, does a config export via the archive, and then does a config import via the archive via the UI, that it now takes into account the state of modules and themes. So you don't need to do that step separately.
Right.
I
Um,
would like to mention that this is dependent on another issue that I think everybody is agreed upon, and that's adding the module that owns the config file into the config file. And that would improve the user interface so that we can tell people exactly what module they need to enable. And it would also make it so that if we did want to follow up with this issue, we could say modules X and Y are going to be enabled when you do this sync. Do you want to do that? Yes, no. And I think having that information will help both the end user in the Backdrop UI or the terminal user if you're doing it via B or something, we could have a prompt there too. And so I think regardless of whether this issue goes in exactly as described, we should definitely focus on getting that other change in.
yeah, this issue is not dependent on that. Um, and it does also,
Well,
there's another,
the file does need to know what module owns it,
right, which is why the
right? So that
modules
is,
are turned on first, and then the modules can tell if they own a config file or not.
so all the modules on your file system are turned on regardless of whether they have a config file or not.
No, that's what this config file does, is it lets the modules turn on first, and then the modules can claim the config file because they're
But
turned
what
on,
modules do you turn on
the
if
ones
you
that are in
don't?
this config file. That that's exactly it, is that we need this config file to say which modules need to be turned on.
Or we could solve the other issue,
Well,
right?
there's some aspects here too that sometimes modules don't provide a config file, but whether or not that module is turned on is still an important part of your deployment process. Like some contrib modules don't even provide config. And if you're not tracking that in config in a separate file,
You
then
don't have any way.
there's no way to identify is that module turned on or off or not.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's almost always the case for my custom modules, at least, that when I turn on, I don't usually write config for a custom module because it's
It's mostly
tailored to
alters
that
or something.
purpose. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's just a bunch of alters. So I could see that just being a frequent deployment mistake, that you think running config sync is going to make your two environments the same, but we're not, that module you might overlook the fact that it didn't get turned on.
Right.
Okay.
So,
Well, then instead of saying it's dependent, I would just like to mention there is also another issue that will provide a better user
Okay.
experience as well as a better developer experience
Sure.
too, and it's related. And it is linked in here too on this
Okay.
issue.
On
Go ahead,
August 23rd, 21, I posted a note about what I think is a non-developer, like a site builder scenario, which is you're trying to move your site with backup and migrate. And I don't remember this exactly. It's been 4 or 5 years, but I sort of describe it as the process, and it basically ends with importing config, using backup and migrate, and then getting a whole bunch of weird, having to re-enable, that part I didn't describe. So I don't remember exactly what it was, but apparently it's a nuisance. And supposedly this would take care of that.
That's funny because this information is in the database and Backup and Migrate should have that information in the database before you run the config import. So it should already have handled that just in how it works. So that might also be a bug in Backup and Migrate we could fix separately. Doesn't mean it's not related to this too, but that problem shouldn't be happening regardless. I'll go check that just for funsies.
Yeah, well, look at my comment on August 23rd, 21 on this issue. It does provide some details, but I wish it provided more.
Yeah, this issue also, as it's written right now, and looks like this title was already updated, but
Yeah,
as the pull request exists right now, it only provides the capability to enable a module. It does not have
so it
this.
was the comment before that I was referring to.
Oh yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
So
I
I'll
see.
live
There
up
were
to
there were
my
two
Yeah.
on the same day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll live up to my bull in the china shop reputation by coming here after a few months and like challenging Nate. But at least I have Jen on my side. here. I mean, one of the things that periodically, like I've bitched about config management since the very beginning, and one of the things that bugs me about it is that it seems inherently hostile towards non-programmers who are trying to do site building things and trying to do things like, copy your site from one place to another or deploy it to a host or something like this. And, you're stuck with these config files, but it sounds like they don't have quite enough power. If the config files are necessary for the thing to run, but they can't tell the world about what their requirements are, that seems like a kind of structural limitation to them. And if we were to kind of if we would give the config files more power, like, okay, if you're going to include these, at least let them, if they have the power to veto something, at least give them the ability to telegraph why they're vetoing it. And I need this module, and be able to say, look, I'm vetoing your thing because I need these three modules whose names I know. But if the config files don't have those names, then they can't do that. And Nate, I'm sympathetic to the thought that you and lots of other people might have written lots of modules that don't have config files. But I mean, that sounds like something that you somebody could write a program for that would just do that as an update. Like, okay,
Yeah. This is also
create them
interesting,
if they
right,
don't
where it's like,
exist.
this is a developer problem that can be solved by developers, but we could also make it easier on developers too. Yeah, this is one of those things where it's like the people who are experiencing this problem are the people who are most capable of resolving it on their own, which I think is part of why I was like, is this really necessary? Like, these are the people who can write an update hook. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like if there are enough people in the community who feel like this would be a big time saver for them, then maybe we do that too. But Luke, also would like to solve the like more low-hanging fruit, like just let a module write a good error message telling you the config file's missing, right? Where right now we can't communicate that to can't even communicate that to the end user. So I think we need both. I think Luke, to your point, I think that friendlier messaging is more important. But if we have more people working on this, maybe it's more important to them. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like the config file handling is a more complicated issue than we realize because we're the survivors. Anybody that's come into the community that didn't get it has left because they didn't get it. So uh, maybe we should, I don't know, think about that test. Obviously, it's hard to declare a round of testing, but I just think it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, I think what you're saying about it being, hostile to, people moving sites around the way that they would typically think that, copy the database and I'm done, right? Um, yeah, that having config files as they exist right now, where they're always, well, they're by default on disk, upsets a lot of people's expectations around, PHP, MySQL based software, that there's the database and then there's the code, and that's all that you need to worry about. But with our config being a third thing that you need to worry about, that can really throw people off. And we did introduce database stored config, and you can turn that on now, but it's not the default. And I don't know if that's the solution, that like the config being in files just has it's got its own benefits, but it also has its own drawbacks. But if config were stored in the database by default, that would make it so that people coming in that didn't know what config was wouldn't need to know what config is. Like it would just be there if they wanted to use it, but it wouldn't be in their faces as like a required concept that you need to know, which is what it is
Yes,
right now.
yes and no, because the minute they want to make a deployment and they fail, they're going to have to learn the hard way about it. This is a lot like Drupal, right? Where it's like, oh, I need to make a deployment. Oh, my configuration is, but now I need to write an update hook. And they're like, wait, what in the database do I update in order to make that change? And why is there this massive like JSON string. It's just the kind of thing where I feel like they're gonna have to learn it at some point. The question is, you know, right now they sort of don't need to know about it as long as they can configure everything correctly until they hit that. I don't know. I'm not sure hiding it is gonna be
I don't
the most
understand.
helpful
I
for
don't
those.
understand the assumption that they're going to have to learn it anyways. I think a lot of people, deploy their site, maybe they do it locally and then just transfer it once using
Once.
backup and migrate or something to a hosting, and they're done, right? That's the life of their.
Yeah, the statement you had about do a deployment for people coming in, there's only one deployment ever, and that's the initial build of the site,
Yeah.
and then
Huh.
there's no more deployment.
This is
Well,
blowing my
well, I
mind. I'm
mean,
like, nobody ever updates anything, adds any new features later.
They do,
No.
they just
Oh.
do it all on
On
production.
the live site?
oh yeah. Well, it feels like it puts a gap between
Well,
what total weekend hobbyists do and what like the enterprise people do. Like if you're a weekend hobbyist, you screw around your site, and if you break, no one cares. And if you're an enterprise person, like every single detail has to be correct or else you don't get paid. So you would rather have it crash than work imperfectly. But I think in the between there's this kind of a big gulf. Like I'd be okay if pulling in an incorrect thing rather than just crash and say I'm not going to do that. It puts up an error message and says this looks
Right.
like a bad idea. All these things are going to break. But if you want, go ahead and do it and see what happens.
Or like, here's a button.
And yeah,
You can push this button and I'll fix it for you, right? Where like, that's the thing that I think Nate and I were talking about the other day, where I was like, I would really like that if you would do a config sync. It would be like, would you like me to enable these 3 modules for you? Yes, no.
Yeah.
And then that way you're like, oh, I don't want devel, uncheck, right? But the other 2 I definitely do want, so check. And then I'll enable those 2, and then I can go remove the devel config file and then sync again.
yeah.
And I think,
I mean, sorry, go on.
yeah, I was just saying, I think that would be super helpful for those in between people, because it would be teaching them how the system worked, but also not, it would be frustrating them in the process. It would be like, I'm helping you. Yeah.
So, so since the beginning and to this day, in both, you know, Drupal and Backdrop, that where Nate, you copied things from Drupal that you like. You get this, when you import these configs, it gives you what seems like sort of helpful messages, like, okay, these like 7 things are wrong. But then you're just helpless. It's like, and then go off and figure out why, and like try it again, incredibly painfully days later if you're
Yeah.
still interested. Instead of just being like, okay, I'll do this one, not that one. That's fine. Go ahead. I mean, all the time it's crashing for things, and I know what they are. I'm like, okay, this is a stupid module that I tried and didn't want to use, and I don't want to use it anymore. So just ignore it. But it won't give me that option. I have to like go worry about UUIDs, and I mean, I'm not sure if that's the thing, but like all this stuff that I don't care about because I'm really like, yes, thank you for helpfully telling me that's a problem. I don't care. Just do it.
Yep. Yep. Well, and I think that this falls into that category of like, this is something that we know that we can fix for our users, that this module needs to be turned on first. And it's like, man, if we start tracking that, then we can actually do something about it rather than.
We've got 2 ways to track it. And I think, Luke, I think both are valid. I think you and I are fighting for the like, just let the file define it. And other people are fighting for like, just have another file that defines them all. I think there's no harm in having both. So.
No. Yeah, there's not either way, even if we added the module dependencies in the config files, we would still need a way to turn on modules as part of config sync. And this sets up all of the infrastructure for the complexities of like the modules need to be turned on before the config can be imported. We need to have that ability in order to make it so that like a module can't just be turned on halfway through the config import. It really needs to be turned on first before any other config comes in. And so we
But
need that infrastructure.
That's how it works on the sync page, right? Where like when it prints the errors, it has stopped importing everything. It's not like it's halfway through and it throws an error, right? It tries to import, it fails, it doesn't import, and then it shows the errors. So that's where when you turn on the modules, it's still before you do the sync. It's
Yeah,
not in the
well, yeah, there's two steps. It doesn't try to do the import. It runs the validator
right.
and the validator shows them the error messages. If it fails halfway through the import, then you've got a whole different, like a
Yeah, yeah.
much bigger set of
I'm not sure
problems.
I've ever seen that actually.
No, yeah, it's
It's been pretty good.
the validator does a pretty good job of making
Yeah,
sure that it's going to work,
yeah.
which is great. Okay,
Anyway, I
well,
think we can have both. Luke, I think you're right. Nate, I see your point. So if people want to work on this issue, go for it. But
yeah.
also, let's work on the other one.
Yeah, I
Just for
think it would be
better
great.
messaging,
So
nothing else.
that pull request needs review is the current state of things, 5163. So I'd love it if people that are interested or not would take a look at it and see what they think about it. One thing I'll flag it as like a corner case that does need consideration is that it is possible for the following to happen, which doesn't right now. In it'll be hard to actually find a scenario where this might occur, but it turns on modules first, uh, and then that allows all modules to claim config files that might be there. But it's possible that a new module might be turned on, and that module provides config files that are also being imported. And then it runs the validate step to make sure that those config files are okay before importing them. If that validation fails, then you end up in a scenario where a new module has been turned on, but its configuration validation failed. And so it stops and says whatever the validation error message was, but then that module is left on in the current approach, which is that a big enough problem that that it needs to be addressed in this? I'm not quite sure. It could be enabled, run the validation to make sure it's okay, and then if it fails, we could have another step that's like turn it back off real quick. So it gets turned on just to run the validate, and then if it fails, then it turns back off. But I just don't know if that's a problem that is a real concern. Okay. All right, we have 10 more minutes. We've got other issues yet. Let's see. Go back to sharing. Let's see. We've got two. I'm not sure that we'll be able to get to both of them. Should we talk about the project search or should we talk about password hashing?
Wait, can we go back to the config file issue real quick?
Okay.
Just a thought. So I found the issue that Nate, I think you and I were remembering. It was actually reported as a bug that config sync did not recognize key ordering because apparently there's an issue in
Oh,
views where views depends on a key order or something. And so
oh,
if it doesn't track that, it breaks.
that's right.
And so I'm going to link that in here, but I just wanted to just call attention to my alphabetical idea isn't going to work because of that.
Yeah, and
maybe
that's
that
this
might
that's this
eliminate some
issue,
of the other.
6939 that we're talking about.
Yes.
Okay, this config issue.
6939, yeah. Actually, and the related issue, I'll drop a link in, but the related issue is 6348. I'll add a link there.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think if it's okay, I'm going to open up password
Go ahead.
hashing.
Yep.
So this issue's been also open for a couple years about what to do with our current password hashing that PHP has started including a better hashing algorithm than we're currently using. So we're using an algorithm that it's called PHP Pass that has been ported essentially into Backdrop's custom code. And PHP now includes an algorithm that is similar, that is better, starting with PHP 5.5 and later, which we now require PHP 7.1. So we're definitely within that, ability to start using it. I'm not quite. I think this is a great idea. I'm not quite sure how we can implement it yet, though. somewhere in here, it's noted that you can already swap out password.inc with a different password.inc, but this isn't, we can't just like swap it out. We need to actually have the ability to run multiple hashes on top of each other because we need to be able to continue letting users log in at least once, make sure that their hash is valid, but then rehash it and save using the new method. So for some period of time, you need to be running both the old way and the new way at the same time. Well, I mean, that's, I would say, the best case scenario where you continue letting people log in using the previous hash method and then automatically update it the next time they log in. The other alternative would be everybody has to reset all of their passwords via password reset, which I don't think is a solution that we would be happy with. So yeah, so just swapping out password.inc isn't going to be sufficient for us because we need to be able to run multiple algorithms at the same time. Password.inc, if we take a look at it.
Yeah, I think the passwording, you'd have to do it from the start of your site, wouldn't you? If you wanted a different one, you'd implement it when you started your site rather than partway through.
Yeah, so all of these functions here, if you look at my sidebar, these ones that are all underscore prefixed are all of the custom hashing implementation. But then down here at the bottom are the three key functions: user hash password, user check password, and user needs new hash. And I don't think that we'll be able to, swap out like password.inc being included the way that it is right now is, although I think rare that people swap it out. From a compatibility standpoint, we need the ability to continue swapping out this file, which the approach then is that you have these three functions that must be in your password.inc file, and then you can make it do something else. But what I think should be done here is that these three functions can continue to live in this file, but then all of these other functions that include a custom implementation should be separated out. And when you call user hash password and user check password and user needs new hash, it then cycles through the other hashing mechanisms that we would also have some setting for in settings.php that is like, what are the hashing mechanisms that are available and what is the order in which they're executed. And what I'm kind of imagining that looks like is that but I always think that whenever you have like a file that you need to have the same functions in these different files that you're expecting them to exist in, it shouldn't be a .inc file with the same function names at that point. It should be a class with methods on it so that you've got, the consistency of the class structure and an interface that says these are the functions that I'm expecting. So what I think is the implementation I'd like to see is that these three functions continue to live in here, but what they do is they instead check what password classes are available, loop through the password classes, and then do the hashing algorithms based on those classes. I'm trying to think of if we have some example of this kind of class list in settings.php. I'm not sure that we do. Is anybody else going to help me out here? Like, here we go. Yeah, here we go. Like this. Our config storages. Our config storages are defined via classes like this, and I think that that would be the right way to do this password thing too. Only it would be something more like it might be an array of classes like password classes, and then have it be something like you know backdrop PHP password versus, oh, and it should be in order. PHP password. Something like that. Let's see. What are we using right now? It's called PHP pass. So it'd be something like this. Yeah. And then that would run this one first and then this one second if that one failed. Something of that nature. I'm not totally sure that this is what it would end up looking like, but
It
something
could
of that
also,
nature.
I'm not sure if I want to say this because I hate how mail system works, but it could also be something like mail system where the class is actually a configuration option. And so that way there could be like a prompt, I don't like how mail system works, but there could,
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, that could totally be instead of it being this, it could be, system core
yeah,
password classes like that.
yeah,
Yeah, and then that would because this is the password hashing is not so low level that it needs to be available like before everything else. And so
yeah,
it could be part of config and we could have a UI for it theoretically.
yeah.
And all of those things. Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, and I agree. It wouldn't like let's not do anything like mail system, but
Yeah, but just the fact that you can save that class someplace where you can change it through the UI, I think is helpful.
hmm Yeah, and the UI, of course, it wouldn't say like what, algorithm, it wouldn't use these
What is the
internal
name of your
things.
class? It would just be like, here's a system you can use. And that would also make it um like a config mo or contrib module could add another one in the future. Like if somebody wanted a much more complicated system or something, you could just swap out the class that
Yeah.
way.
Drupal did a thing where they took the old PHP pass implementation and put it into a separate module called password compatibility, I think. Uh, I kind of feel conflicted about that. Like it's really convenient that on a new site, it doesn't turn on
Oh,
the
sure.
password compatibility module, so you're only using the new algorithm moving forward. But there's just something that grates in me about having a module that you would never turn on that's like always there. That it's kind of I don't know, the having a user interface for this, I kind of feel like it's a little bit in your face. And what I think I would probably lean towards is making this be rather invisible, that even if this was in system core password classes, then an update hook would specify these two as the default moving forward, and the out-of-box install would only include the new one and not the
Yeah,
previous one. And that
yeah,
way it wouldn't be a separate module and it would be invisible to the users that there are two systems and it just uses the new one on new installs and it uses both of them on old installs. And if at some point you really want to commit to just one or the other, then you would go into system core and remove the old one.
Does the does the user needs new hash function have a role here in that could you make it so that once you do the update that included the new class, it would flag that so they would still be able to log in, but it would when they logged in, it would create the new hash automatically because that function would be flagged.
Yep. Yep, that's exactly it. And so we need something along the lines of like uh, identifying, we need a way to identify which hash was used previously. And then if that hash is identified as like, oh, this is a PHP pass hash, then user password needs rehash comes back true. And then it takes the password that they just used during that post request, rehashes it as the new password, and then updates the user table. Exactly. So that's exactly the way that it works right now. Where in the PHP pass method, we have this setting for like how strong is the encryption, like how many hashes does it run through, and the hash count. And right now it's 16. And the password needs rehash function right now is intended to look at that constant we're supposed to increase every couple of years to increase the complexity of password hashing. And if you increase that from like 16 to 20 right now, then it does exactly that same process where the user logs in, it sees that the hash isn't strong enough anymore, it rehashes it to a stronger level of encryption and then updates the user table with the stronger hash. And so we'll basically be doing the same thing, only we'll be switching algorithms rather than increasing the strength of the current one.
Mm.
Yeah,
And
so that yeah,
is there a pattern in the hashes? So the existing hashes start with $S dollar. So does the other hash have a different starting pattern so we could easily tell whether the hash was the old or the new?
I don't know for sure. I think so. I think there must be a way to identify it.
I think
But I'm not totally sure.
I think the current ones like all start with the same 4 characters or something. So we could just make sure the new ones start with different 4 characters, and that might be enough. There's something about them that makes them identifiable. That might not be it, but
Yeah. Taking a look now at it. So yeah, I was thinking like it would also just be nice if it just said what algorithm was used in the users table, like pass algorithm or
is that
something like that.
a security issue?
But well, I mean, it's either that or, you know, we identify the algorithm by its appearance, right? Like the $S dollar, right?
Yeah.
So that it's like that information is there already. It's just that it's like
How
embedded it as part of the column right now.
how hard do you want to make it to be defined?
Yeah. So anyway, I this would be great. This is the housekeeping sort of thing that we could do better password hashing than we're doing right now. There's no well, I can't really say this with 100% certainty that there's no like our hashing algorithm is not insecure right now. It's just that
Mm.
it could be better. Um,
There is a different format running. I've just used online php.io to test out, and they start with $2. So there is definitely a difference.
Oh, you're saying that it has a certain pattern
Yeah.
in the new way. That's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that even the PHP password hashing algorithms were based on the same concept of PHP pass. But they're better. But you can also specify an algorithm into PHP pass about which hash it
Mm.
uses. And it runs through the hash a bunch of times in the same way that we currently hash a bunch of times. It's just that right now what do we do? Can't remember like if it's an MD5 or not, that it just like just runs through it a bunch of times. Um, and so I don't know if that means that the new password system also like when you pass in a different algorithm, because you could choose which algorithm you want the hash to be based on.
Yeah.
If that changing the algorithm also creates a like identifiable hash on the output that's like, oh, this is a bcrypt password versus this is a SHA-1
Mm.
password. I don't know.
I can't see one. It looks like it starts with. They all seem to start with $2 dollar, and then there's the cost element, which is shown, and then there's another dollar. So I guess the cost element is how many times it runs through it, but it
Yeah.
doesn't seem to show the algorithm in the um in the hash. Not that I can spot anyway.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this would be really great to get implemented. So I hope that kind of recaps the state of that. We are out of time for today. And I do believe there's going to be a meeting after this one today.
Yeah, a user group meeting, we'll be just doing little demos and lightning talks.
Okay, great. Well, we'll close it for today. Does anybody have any last things they want to announce before we end?
Jen, I have a quick question for you afterwards.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you all. I think next week I'm going to be on vacation, so I'll try to organize somebody else to look at this meeting or run this meeting next week. But yeah, I'll see everybody on the internet.